Subnautica is a game that nails the atmosphere and game feel of being stranded alone on an alien world, exploring an unfamiliar ocean. It's visually beautiful and varied, from calming shallow sandscapes to luminescent kelp forests. It sounds great, both in its synth soundtrack, which mixes adventurous and ominous tones, and in its sounds of sea life and oceanic exploration. It provides a stimulating experience gathering resources, crafting items, and upgrading equipment, and has enough narrative intrigue to keep the player invested. But while it does many things right, Subnautica suffers from a few unfortunate issues and one massive, gaping flaw. This video will be an in-depth analysis of Subnautica's mechanics and explain why I think the game has one critical flaw that, for some, will single-handedly ruin the experience. Before that, I think it's important to state that despite my grievances, I think Subnautica is a good game, something which should be clear by how many hours I've put into it. You play the nameless, voiceless, lone survivor of the starship Aurora, which crashes on an alien planet for initially unknown reasons. Though you can presume it's your goal to figure a way off the planet, the game never explicitly tells you what to do or where to go. How deep you can dive is limited by how much oxygen you have remaining, and how far away you can swim from your life pod only by your nerves. When you're not exploring, you'll be gathering fish, metal salvage, plants, and other materials until you fill up your inventory. You'll then return to your life pod and store or craft those resources into other ingredients and equipment, then venture out again. Occasionally, you'll stumble across fallen wreckage from the Aurora or other man-made structures, which you can retrieve or scan to acquire blueprints for new or upgraded equipment. As you continue to upgrade your oxygen tank, diving suit, tools, and later build vehicles, the distance and depth you can travel increases, enabling you to acquire different kinds of resources. This is the main gameplay loop of Subnautica: gather, craft, upgrade, and repeat. The game occasionally prompts you to travel to new locations via radio transmission or by finding scattered data pads, and will usually display a waypoint to them. It's difficult to estimate exactly how much time it takes on average to complete Subnautica. Your playtime will vary based on how single-mindedly you pursue the main story, do side missions, explore, tinker, as well as by how lucky you are. My best guess is the game should take you somewhere between 30 and 40 hours to complete. Subnautica's mood is one of isolation and deep-sea terror. Being exposed to danger from all directions while underwater, hearing mysterious low groans in the distance, and desperately trying to resurface for air can be quite tense. It can also be unnerving traveling along the ocean's surface, not knowing what's beneath you. I don't know if it's impossible to get attacked while on the surface, but it never happened to me once in all my time playing the game. Conversely, lazily swimming in the safe shallows, building an underwater base, and tinkering inside crafting items can be quite relaxing. Despite being in one of many life pods that escaped the Aurora only hours earlier and receiving recent distress calls, you never encounter a single other living person or even find their bodies. This doesn't make much sense to me, but it's forgivable for the game to commit to its theme of isolation. Subnautica does have a story, but calling it that is perhaps giving it too much credit. It's technically a narrative, but it's very minimal. It acts as something to motivate the player forward and wrap things up in the end, which is all it really needs to be. In this video, I wanted primarily to discuss Subnautica's mechanics and flaws, not to make a completely comprehensive analysis regarding every aspect of the game, as many others have already spoken about it. Joseph Anderson has a fantastic video discussing many aspects of the game in depth, including its story, which I've linked in the description. I've done my best not to simply copy what's already been said, but some overlap is unavoidable.
There's no bad without the good, no good without the bad. Sounds like you tasted a bunch of the former. But that only means you're overdue a whole lot of the latter.
Subnautica unfortunately has many issues that bog down the experience. The map is too large and intentionally obtuse. It takes a long time to get around, and important areas are tucked away in cave systems and deep trenches, which is great for the feeling of discovery, but bad if you overlook them. The life pods you find via radio signal are sometimes, but not always, located near areas of interest which are not always apparent. This means if you miss important locations near the life pods, you won't know to return there. Alien teleporters located around the map might have alleviated lengthy travel times, but their implementation is horrible. They're hidden away in far-off, obscure locations and are separated from the ocean in air pockets, meaning you can't take your Seamoth submarine through them. Rather than forming a network of teleporters, they only connect to each other in sets of 2, and they all look the same, so it's hard to remember which one connects where. The loading time between them is long, and they deposit you in similar looking enclosures, so it's inconvenient to check where each one leads. Progress in the game can be halted by not knowing where to go next or where to get the rarer resources you need. The radio signals you receive aren't determined by the passage of time, but rather your overall progress. This can lead to a situation where you have no more radio signals to motivate exploration, and what to get or where to go are a mystery. In the playthrough I recorded for this video, I needed blueprints for the laser cutter to progress through the crashed Aurora. It took me an hour of wandering the seafloor to find enough scannable laser cutter fragments to build one. The game suffers from pop-in, occasional lag, and some bugs, mostly minor ones.
Still suit equipped.
Warning, emergency power only. Oxygen production offline.
Bodily fluids before re-ingest. Please press the activation button in the next 3 seconds. You have chosen not to activate chemical taste neutralization. Thank you and have a nice day.
Most bugs are simple visual glitches like bubbles passing through your base, but can sometimes be worse. I learned the hard way never to leave items, especially the prawn suit, on land, as they will clip through the ground and be lost forever. Pop-in, lag, and bugs, while annoying, don't seriously detract from the experience, but the worst is yet to come. Before proceeding further, I must reiterate that I think Subnautica is a good game. I don't make videos just to dunk on things I dislike, and I wouldn't have put so much time into the game if I thought otherwise. So please keep that in mind and strap in for what's going to be a very lengthy, very critical diatribe on Subnautica's biggest flaw. Subnautica has many engaging features, but its inventory management isn't one of them. In fact, if you look up quality, Subnautica's inventory management is the exact opposite. The game goes out of its way to discourage the player at every turn. From experimenting to exploring, it does its best to squelch the fun out of the game. Let me be clear, this isn't just a minor nuisance. This is a massive problem that almost single-handedly ruins the game. The number of items the player can carry is far too limited, which means either lots of backtracking between their home base and resource gathering areas, or having to discard excess items of lesser, non-immediate value, which always feels bad. In my prior playthroughs of the game, items dropped in the environment persisted, but when I played the game recently to record footage, I found they disappear. I'm not sure if this is a bug. The limited inventory space goes against the game's primary motivation and gameplay loop of gathering resources. You might argue that limited space is realistic. To that I say this: no one can double jump in real life. Unless you're making an extremely technically accurate simulation game, realism is not a good reason for design choices. Besides, the game throws realism out the airlock in many ways, like how one titanium ingot takes up the same space as the 10 ore that made it. Things get worse when you realize that what limited inventory space you have access to is actually a lot less than it first appears. Some items take up 4 times as much space, including basic ingredients like creepvine. As the game progresses, your inventory becomes further and further cluttered with tools and other important items. The map is very big, and it can be hard to recall exactly where points of interest are. You might forget, and you don't want to have to backtrack when you return to your base after exploring. Better take beacons with you so you can mark important locations. Alien teleporters and bases require ion cubes to power and colored tablets. Better make sure you take them with you. Your tools require electricity, and you don't want to run out of energy while on an expedition. Better take a few batteries with you as backups. It's actually possible to quick swap your oxygen tank before running out of air, so you'll want to carry an extra one. You'll be carrying so much with you that you can easily wind up using 50% of your inventory space. There are only 5 hotkey slots for tools, and some tools have very specific niche purposes. This means added busywork swapping tools in and out of hotkey slots. Why not have 10 hotkeys since there are 10 number keys on a keyboard, or better yet, combine the functionality of multiple tools into one? A good candidate for this would be the repair tool and laser cutter, since both are used infrequently, are context sensitive, and are often used in the same areas like shipwrecks. So many tools have niche uses, are impractical, or are redundant with other tools, and I never used them. The flashlight is redundant with the Sea Glide since it also has a flashlight, although when running and collecting items on land, the Sea Glide flicks to the side so you can't see briefly. I never used light sticks for the same reason. You need so many resources, and your inventory is so limited that you'll be spending a lot of time foraging and then returning to base to dump everything into storage lockers before setting out again. I would often forgo exploration, the fun part of the game, and devote expeditions strictly to resource gathering. Rarer resources are found further away from the starting area, and the map is so large that travel times can be 5, 10, or 20 minutes per outing. Remember that this isn't something you only do every once in a while. This is the primary gameplay for upwards of 30 hours. As a result, it doesn't feel like a fun Easter egg hunt, it feels like tedious busy work, and a lot of it. The constant back and forth can be alleviated by using the massive Cyclops submarine as a mobile base and storage center, but you can't build it until late in the game. The base building element of the game becomes a shallower experience than I've preferred when you consider that every new piece and cosmetic prop adds more sunk costs and more futzing with the inventory system. Many base pieces feel pointless. You can build a large, elaborate underwater habitat, you really only need enough room for important modules and storage space. Every piece you don't strictly need represents more busy work gathering resources. As a result, all of my bases were small and minimalistic. If the player dies, usually by running out of oxygen, they lose a lot of the items in their inventory and are teleported back to their base. This can represent 10 or 20 minutes of lost game time as you travel back to your vehicle and reacquire lost items. The game even seems to acknowledge how burdensome this is, as tools are never lost to death, only collectibles. However, you can lose upgrade modules discovered in shipwrecks, which can be expensive to rebuild. If the Sea Moth, or heaven forbid the massive Cyclops submarine, are destroyed from hostile sea creatures or diving too deep, the time and resource investment to rebuild them is probably too much and you're better off reloading. This turns death and consequences from something which should be a tense experience into something to be micromanaged through constantly saving. But this is only skimming the surface. Things get so much worse once you're actually in your base and need to start fabricating items from all of the ingredients you've been collecting. It's important to stay organized. In every playthrough, I put a bunch of storage lockers in one room, label them all with whatever resources they contain, and sort them alphabetically. The signs themselves, despite being cosmetic only, require copper wire. This means more busy work scouring the ocean for limestone deposits which may or may not contain copper. You can see in my playthrough of Below Zero that some of the signs in my locker room are blank because I ran out of copper and couldn't be bothered to find more just to finish them. When fabricating items, you might not have all the ingredients you need, which means rummaging through lockers. If you forget which ingredients you need, as is often the case, especially with the more complicated, novel items, you have to run back to the fabricator or open your PDA to check. Why can't the fabricator simply use any ingredients located in nearby lockers? This would alleviate literally hours of busy work crafting and sifting through items. You can't fabricate multiple items at once and instead have to do so one at a time. This means that, for example, if you have multiple slabs of metal salvage, you can't simply cue the fabricator to craft all of them into titanium ore. Instead, you have to select each one, wait for the animation to play, then select the next one, wait for the animation to play, and so on. You can't skip steps while fabricating either. So for example, some items require titanium ingots, which themselves are crafted from 10 titanium ore. But if you need an item that requires a titanium ingot and you have 10 titanium ore, the fabricator won't skip straight to the end result. No, you first have to craft the ingot before proceeding further. So to recap, the map is too big and resources are spread out everywhere, which means long journeys to and from your base. Your inventory space is too limited, and the space you do have is even more restricted by the cavalcade of tools, beacons, batteries, food, ion cubes, and alien tablets you need to carry, which means resource gathering trips are even more frequent than they should be. It's easy to miss important locations and items, and it's not always clear what you need or where you need to go, which means you often feel lost and go to the same areas over and over. Dying spawns you back at your base and you lose items, which means time wasted regathering resources and returning to where you were, which means constantly spamming the save button anytime a situation seems at all dangerous. There's too much busy work futzing with crafting and managing locker rooms full of resources, and the game doesn't let you stack items, craft multiple things at once, or skip steps, which means crafting is an arduous chore, and combined with trips to gather resources, winds up turning the game into hours of inventory management instead of doing fun things like exploration and discovery. Now, the game does have a creative mode where the player has infinite health, oxygen, food, and resources. Being invincible removes the tension, but it could be a nice change of pace. Unfortunately, it also disables the story. Creative mode only works if you strictly enjoy the exploration and base building parts of the game, or if you want to use it as a testing ground for the various items you wouldn't use otherwise. In my first playthrough of Subnautica, I played for about 20 hours before I became frustrated by the long travel time, endless busy work, and everything else I previously mentioned. Eventually, I ran out of new radio signals and had no idea where to go next or what I was even looking for, which is when I quit. The good parts of the game, exploration, discovery, and atmosphere, intrigued me enough to return to it, and I'm glad I did. The knowledge from my first playthrough helped me to progress more quickly and be better organized. I think it's unfortunate that a first playthrough of the game is probably the worst one. Despite my issues with it, I enjoyed Subnautica and was looking forward to its sequel, Below Zero. My biggest hope was that they'd fix the game's inventory problems, though I didn't expect them to. So, what did they do? Well, Below Zero adds the ability to pin crafting recipes to the screen, although it's limited to 5 at a time. And that's it. No further improvements were made. Disappointing to be sure, but the bigger issue is that Below Zero is a watered-down version of the first game in nearly every way. It adds many more clunky, awkward mechanics to what was already implemented poorly to begin with. Perhaps my favorite part of the original game was the Seamoth, the tiny round submarine that represented freedom as you could travel further and deeper than before without having to constantly resurface for air. Below Zero replaces the Seamoth with the Sea Truck, and as its name implies, it's a slower, less maneuverable, and clunkier version of it. Also, you can only board it from a specific angle, unlike the Seamoth, which could be boarded from any direction. The biggest change from the first game is the addition of large Arctic land areas and a new death by freezing mechanic. It makes land traversal function similarly to diving. You have to be cognizant of freezing to death and either take shelter or use heat-granting items like fevered peppers. But it's much worse than underwater exploration, where you could always resurface for air, because on land, if you aren't near shelter and run out of heating items, there's nothing you can do. Travel on land is slow and the environment looks the same everywhere you go. Worse yet, land exploration accounts for about 50% of the game this time. YouTuber Ceronesthes has an excellent video where he details Below Zero's changes from the first game and its deficiencies, which I've linked in the description. The short of it is that Below Zero has fewer biomes and sea creatures, and what is there is less diverse and less creative. Many of the biomes feel empty and unfinished. Hostile creatures aren't nearly as aggressive or scary looking, and therefore the game has less tension. New additions like a land-based hoverbike and remote-controlled robot penguin are clunky, cumbersome, and feel awful to use. And lastly, the story is an insane, nonsensical train wreck. Despite its flaws, I like the first Subnautica. Below Zero is Subnautica but worse. While I'd recommend the first game, I wouldn't recommend Below Zero. Still, your mileage may vary, and I can see people enjoying both. Thank you for watching.